Carl Jung explained how loving yourself draws true love to you. There's a secret hidden in the deepest vaults of analytical psychology, a discovery so profound, so potentially dangerous to the established order of how we think about love, that Carl Jung himself hesitated to share it openly with the world. Jung's patients who mastered this one principle never struggled with love again. They didn't become more attractive in the conventional sense. They didn't learn pickup techniques or dating strategies. They discovered something far more powerful, the forbidden art of psychological self-love. What Jung discovered challenges everything you've been taught about relationships, about finding the one, about what it means to be complete. He found that love, true, authentic, soul-deep love, isn't about finding someone else at all. It's about integrating the contrasexual archetype within yourself. It's about marrying your own unconscious. It's about committing the ultimate taboo in a culture obsessed with external validation, falling in love with who you really are. This isn't the self-love they sell you in magazines or motivational seminars. This isn't positive affirmations or bubble baths. This is something far more radical, far more transformative, and infinitely more threatening to a society that profits from your sense of incompleteness. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. But what he really meant was this: becoming so complete within yourself that you no longer need another person to fill the void. And here's the paradox that will change everything you think you know about attraction. The moment you no longer need someone is the exact moment you become irresistibly magnetic to the right someone. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. Jung wrote, if there is any reaction, both are transformed. But here's what he didn't tell you directly. This transformation can only happen between two people who have already undergone their own internal chemical reaction. Two people who have married themselves first. Think about every relationship you've ever been in, every person you've ever fallen for, every heartbreak that left you questioning your worth. Now consider this possibility. What if every rejection, every failed connection, every moment of loneliness was actually your psyche's way of forcing you toward this ultimate realization that the love you seek outside exists only when you've cultivated it within? Tonight, I'm going to take you on a journey through the 12 stages of psychological transformation that lead from self-rejection to magnetic authenticity. We're going to explore the unconscious forces that have been sabotaging your relationships without your knowledge. We're going to meet the internal lover you never knew existed, your Anima or Animus, the contrasexual figure within your psyche who holds the key to wholeness. And we're going to discover why the very act of desperately seeking external love creates an energetic repulsion field that pushes away exactly what you're trying to attract. This isn't just psychology. This is initiation into a mystery that most people never discover, that you are already complete. You have always been complete. And the moment you truly understand this, everything changes, not just in your relationships, but in every area of your life. But I have to warn you, once you see what I'm about to show you, there's no going back to the comfortable illusion of incompleteness. Once you understand how projection works, how the shadow operates, how the persona masks your authentic self, you can never again blame external circumstances for your romantic life. The responsibility and the power becomes entirely yours. So ask yourself, are you ready to discover the secret that Jung's most successful patients learned? Are you ready to become the kind of person who doesn't chase love because love gravitates naturally toward them? Are you ready to fall in love with yourself so deeply that others can't help but fall in love with that love? If your answer is yes, then what follows will revolutionize not just your understanding of relationships, but your entire relationship with existence itself. Because this journey isn't just about attracting love, It's about becoming love. And there's nothing more magnetic than someone who has remembered they are already whole. Before we can understand how self-love attracts true love, we must first expose the unconscious conspiracy that has been working against you your entire life. This conspiracy isn't orchestrated by any external force. It's far more insidious than that. It's woven into the very fabric of how you were conditioned to think about yourself and relationships from the moment you took your first breath. Society has sold you the most damaging lie in human history, that you are incomplete, that somewhere out there exists another person who will complete you, fulfill you, make you whole. This isn't just romantic mythology, it's psychological poison that creates the exact conditions that repel authentic love. Every movie you've watched, every song you've heard, every story you've been told has programmed you to believe that your wholeness depends on finding your other half. But Jung discovered something that threatens this entire narrative. You are not half of anything. You are already complete. The very belief in your incompleteness creates what I call the love shadow, a constellation of desperate behaviors, unconscious projections, and energetic neediness that makes you radioactive to genuine connection. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah came to therapy convinced that she was cursed in love. Every man she dated turned out to be emotionally unavailable, commitment phobic, or already involved with someone else. She had a pattern so consistent, it seemed supernatural. It's like I have a sign on my forehead that says, unavailable, men only, she told me through tears. What Sarah didn't realize was that she did have a sign on her forehead, not a physical one, but an energetic signature that broadcast a very specific message to the unconscious minds of others. That message was, I am incomplete, please fill this void. And the only men who responded to that signal were those who were equally unconscious, equally fragmented, equally desperate to use another person to avoid facing their own emptiness. Sarah had fallen into what Jung called the projection trap. Every time she looked at a man, she wasn't seeing him at all. She was seeing her own disowned masculine qualities, her animus, projected onto his canvas. She fell in love with her own unconscious content reflected back to her through another person. And because no human being can sustain the weight of carrying someone else's wholeness, every relationship inevitably collapsed under the impossible expectations. This is how the unconscious conspiracy works. It convinces you that love is about finding someone who possesses what you lack. If you feel weak, you seek someone strong. If you feel incomplete, you seek someone who seems whole. If you feel unworthy, you seek someone whose attention might validate your existence. But here's what Jung understood that almost no one teaches. What you're seeking in another person is always a disowned part of yourself. The cultural programming runs deeper than you imagine. From childhood, you learned that love is conditional, that you have to be good enough, attractive enough, successful enough, interesting enough to deserve affection. You internalized the belief that love is earned through performance rather than given through being. This created what psychologists call the fundamental wound of unworthiness, the core belief that you are not lovable as you are. This wound becomes the organizing principle of your entire romantic life. It whispers, if they really knew you, they wouldn't love you. It drives you to present a false self, a carefully curated persona designed to win approval. You become an actor in your own love story, playing a role you think others want to see, rather than revealing who you actually are. But here's the cruel irony. The more perfectly you perform this role, the more lonely you become. Because even if someone falls in love with your performance, you know they haven't fallen in love with you. They've fallen in love with your mask. And masks are exhausting to maintain. They require constant vigilance, constant energy, constant fear that you'll slip up and reveal your true self. This creates what I call the authentic connection paradox. The very strategies you use to attract love are the same strategies that prevent authentic intimacy. The persona that wins initial attraction becomes the barrier to genuine connection. You end up trapped in relationships where you're loved for who you're pretending to be, rather than who you actually are. Jung observed that most people would rather be unconscious than responsible for their own wholeness. It's easier to blame external circumstances, to claim that all the good ones are taken, to believe that love is just a matter of luck or timing. But this victim consciousness is precisely what keeps you trapped in patterns of unfulfilling relationships. The unconscious conspiracy convinces you that your emotional state depends on external validation. You give your power away to others, making them responsible for your happiness, your self-worth, your sense of completeness. And then you wonder why you attract people who are equally unconscious, equally fragmented, equally desperate to use relationship as an escape from self-confrontation. I want you to pause for a moment and honestly examine your own relationship patterns. Have you noticed that you tend to attract the same type of person over and over again? Have you found yourself in relationships where you felt more lonely than when you were single? Have you ever caught yourself changing who you are to accommodate someone else's preferences or expectations? If you're nodding along to any of this, you're not broken, you're not cursed. You're simply operating from unconscious programming that was designed to keep you dependent on external sources of validation. But here's the liberating truth. Once you understand the conspiracy, you can free yourself from it. Once you see how projection works, you can start withdrawing your projections. Once you recognize your persona, you can begin to let it drop. The path to authentic love doesn't begin with finding the right person. It begins with becoming the right person, not in the sense of self-improvement or self-optimization, but in the sense of self-revelation. It begins with the radical act of loving yourself exactly as you are right now, before any external validation arrives. But first, we must dive deeper into the mechanism of projection. We must meet the internal lover you've been seeking in others your entire life. We must encounter your anima or animus, the contra-sexual archetype that holds the key to psychological wholeness. Because until you marry this internal lover, you will continue to seek completion through others, and you will continue to be disappointed by the impossibility of that task. What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally alter how you understand attraction, compatibility, and the mysterious pull you feel toward certain people. Hidden within your unconscious mind lives a figure so powerful, so magnetic, that it has been orchestrating your romantic life from behind the scenes without your knowledge. Jung called this figure the anima in men and the animus in women, your internal contra-sexual archetype, your psychological opposite, your inner lover. Every person carries within themselves the seed of their opposite gender. In men, this manifests as the anima, the feminine principle that holds qualities like receptivity, intuition, emotional depth, and the capacity for relationship. In women, this appears as the animus, the masculine principle embodying assertion, logic, goal orientation, and the drive toward achievement. These aren't just abstract concepts. They are living, breathing psychological entities with their own personalities, preferences, and agendas. Here's where it gets revolutionary. Every person you've ever fallen in love with has been a reflection of this internal figure. Every crush, every attraction, every chemistry you've felt has been your psyche recognizing its own opposite nature, projected onto another human being. You haven't been falling in love with other people. You've been falling in love with reflections of your own wholeness. Jung wrote, "The anima is the archetype of life itself." But what he meant was more profound than most people realize. Your anima or animus represents not just the opposite gender within you, but the missing piece of your psychological completeness. It carries all the qualities you've been unconsciously seeking in a partner, because these are the qualities you haven't yet developed within yourself. Let me tell you about David. David came to me frustrated by his pattern of falling for what he called his dream girl. Women who were mysterious, artistic, deeply emotional, and seemingly connected to something transcendent. Without exception, these relationships would begin with intense passion and end in bitter disappointment. The women would eventually reveal themselves to be human, flawed, complex, sometimes petty or mundane, and David would feel betrayed, as if they had deceived him. What David didn't understand was that he wasn't attracted to these women at all. He was attracted to his own anima, his undeveloped feminine side, that he was projecting onto them. The mystery he found so alluring was his own intuitive capacity that he had never cultivated. The artistic depth that captivated him was his own creative potential that he had suppressed in favor of conventional masculine achievement. The emotional richness that drew him was his own feeling function that he had been taught to ignore. Every time David fell in love, he was actually encountering a part of himself. And every time the relationship failed, it was because he was expecting a human woman to carry the impossible weight of his psychological wholeness. No person can sustain being someone else's anima projection. The pedestal always crumbles because pedestals are fundamentally unstable. They exist in fantasy, not reality. This is how anima and animus projections work. They create what feels like magical attraction, instant chemistry, love at first sight. You see someone and immediately feel like you've known them forever, like they're your missing piece, your soulmate. But what you're actually recognizing is your own unconscious content, reflected in their appearance, manner, or energy. The anima typically appears in a man's dreams and fantasies as a woman who embodies everything he feels he lacks. Perhaps she's wise where he feels ignorant, emotionally expressive where he's shut down, connected to nature where he's overly mental, or spiritually attuned where he's materialistically focused. The animus often appears in a woman's dreams as a man who represents the qualities she hasn't owned. Perhaps he's confidently assertive where she's passive, intellectually brilliant where she doubts her mind, or powerfully goal-oriented where she feels directionless. These internal figures are not problems to be solved. They are treasures to be integrated. The goal isn't to eliminate anima and animus projections, but to recognize them for what they are, invitations to wholeness. Each projection is your psyche's way of showing you what needs to be developed within yourself. When David began to understand this, everything changed. Instead of seeking his anima in women, he began cultivating a relationship with his own feminine side. He started journaling to develop his emotional expressiveness. He took up painting to connect with his artistic nature. He began meditation to access his intuitive wisdom. Gradually, the desperate quality in his attraction to women began to shift. The most remarkable thing happened. As David became more psychologically complete within himself, he started attracting women who were also on their own individuation journey. The relationships became collaborations between two whole people rather than desperate attempts by two halves to become complete. The chemistry was still there, but it was based on recognition rather than projection, on appreciation rather than neediness. This is the anima-animus revelation. Your internal lover is not a fantasy figure to be sought in others, but a real part of your psyche to be developed within yourself. When you marry your own opposite nature, when you integrate your contrasexual side, you become magnetically attractive because you embody the very completeness that others are unconsciously seeking. But integration isn't easy. Your anima or animus often carries qualities that your ego finds threatening or unacceptable. Men are often terrified of their feminine side because they've been taught that receptivity equals weakness, that emotion equals instability, that intuition equals irrationality. Women are often afraid of their masculine side because they've learned that assertion equals aggression, that ambition equals selfishness, that intellectual confidence equals arrogance. The path to integration requires courage, the courage to embrace what you've been taught to reject about yourself. It requires recognizing that your anima or animus isn't the opposite of who you are, but the completion of who you could become. It requires understanding that psychological androgyny, the integration of masculine and feminine principles within one person, isn't about becoming less of your gender, but about becoming more fully human. Jung observed that the anima and animus serve as bridges to the unconscious, as mediators between the conscious ego and the deeper layers of the psyche. When you develop a relationship with your internal lover, you gain access to parts of yourself that have been hidden in shadow. You become more creative, more intuitive, more emotionally intelligent, more assertive, depending on what your contrasexual side has been carrying for you. I want you to take a moment and reflect. What qualities do you consistently find attractive in others? What type of person do you tend to fall for? What characteristics do you seek in a partner that you feel you lack in yourself? These attractions are not random. They are your anima or animus showing you the path to your own completeness. The internal marriage between your conscious ego and your contrasexual archetype is the most important relationship you will ever have. It's the foundation upon which all external relationships are built. When this internal union is harmonious, your external relationships reflect that harmony. When it's conflicted, your relationships become battlegrounds for unconscious projections and unrealistic expectations. But integrating the anima or animus is just the beginning of the individuation process. There are deeper layers to explore, more challenging aspects of the self to embrace. Because before you can fully love your internal opposite, you must first learn to love the parts of yourself that you've been taught to hate. You must journey into the shadow, the repository of everything you've rejected about yourself, and discover the gold that has been hidden in the darkness. The journey from self-rejection to authentic self-love is not a simple process of positive thinking or affirmation. It's a profound psychological transformation that follows a predictable pattern, one that Jung mapped out in his understanding of individuation, but that applies directly to our capacity for both self-love and attracting genuine intimacy. This journey unfolds in 4 distinct stages, each with its own challenges, revelations, and transformative potential. Most people get stuck in the first stage and spend their entire lives cycling through the same relationship patterns, wondering why love feels so elusive. But those who have the courage to move through all 4 stages discover something remarkable. They become magnetically attractive not through effort or strategy, but through the simple fact of being authentically, unapologetically themselves. Stage 1. Recognition, seeing through the persona. The first stage of psychological self-love begins with a shocking recognition. Almost everything you present to the world, especially in romantic contexts, is not really you. It's what Jung called the persona, a carefully constructed mask designed to win approval, avoid rejection, and navigate social expectations. This mask has become so familiar that you've forgotten it's not your true face. In relationships, the persona manifests as the perfect partner version of yourself. You become who you think the other person wants you to be. You emphasize certain qualities while hiding others. You perform interest in activities that bore you, suppress opinions that might create conflict, and present a version of yourself that's designed to be as attractive and non-threatening as possible. Sarah, whom we met earlier, had perfected the persona of the cool girl, low maintenance, always agreeable, never needy or demanding. She prided herself on being different from other women, more understanding, more flexible. But beneath this mask, she was dying of loneliness. The cool girl persona had become a prison that prevented anyone from ever knowing her true thoughts, feelings, or desires. Recognition begins when you start to notice the exhaustion that comes from constant performance. You realize that you don't actually know who you are beneath all the strategies for being lovable. You begin to see how the mask, while designed to attract love, actually prevents authentic intimacy. You start to question, if someone falls in love with my performance, have they fallen in love with me at all? This stage is often triggered by a crisis. A relationship ends despite your perfect performance. You feel lonely even when surrounded by admirers, or you catch yourself pretending to be someone you're not, and feel disgusted by the fakeness. The recognition can be devastating because it reveals how far you've drifted from your authentic self in the pursuit of external validation. Stage 2. Integration, embracing the shadow. The second stage involves the most challenging aspect of self-love, learning to embrace the parts of yourself that you've been taught to reject. This is shadow work, the process of reclaiming the aspects of your personality that you've disowned because they don't fit your image of who you should be. Your shadow contains not just negative qualities, but also positive ones that you've rejected because they felt too dangerous, too powerful, or too threatening to others. Perhaps you've disowned your anger because you learned that anger makes you unlovable, but in doing so, you've also lost your capacity for healthy boundaries. Perhaps you've rejected your sexuality because you were taught it was shameful, but you've also lost access to your life force and magnetism. Integration means learning to love these rejected parts of yourself. It means understanding that your anger is not toxic. It's information about your boundaries. Your sadness is not weakness. It's the depth of your capacity to feel. Your selfishness is not evil. It's your instinct for self-preservation and self-care. Maria discovered that she had spent years suppressing what she called her selfish side, her capacity to prioritize her own needs, desires, and dreams. She had been taught that good women are always giving, always sacrificing, always putting others first. But this persona of endless selflessness had made her invisible in relationships. Partners took her for granted because she had taught them that her needs didn't matter. When Maria began to integrate her selfish shadow, she started saying no to requests that drained her energy. She began prioritizing activities that brought her joy rather than always accommodating others. She started expressing her desires and preferences instead of always asking what others wanted. The results were immediate and surprising. Instead of pushing people away, her newfound self-regard made her more attractive. People were drawn to her new energy, her clarity, her presence. Shadow integration in the context of self-love means recognizing that you cannot truly love yourself while rejecting major aspects of who you are. Every quality you've disowned because it's unlovable is actually a part of your wholeness that needs to be reclaimed. The goal isn't to act out these shadow qualities unconsciously, but to integrate them consciously, to own them, understand them, and express them appropriately. Stage 3. Differentiation, becoming unique. The third stage involves the courage to be different, to stop trying to fit in, to allow your unique essence to emerge, even if it makes you strange, difficult, or incomprehensible to others. Differentiation is about discovering and expressing your authentic nature rather than molding yourself to meet external expectations. This stage often feels terrifying because it requires giving up the safety of conformity. When you differentiate, you risk rejection, misunderstanding, and isolation, but you also open the possibility for the kind of deep, authentic connection that can only exist between two people who know and express their true selves. Tom had spent his entire dating life being the perfect boyfriend, attentive, romantic, predictable, safe. Women liked him, but they rarely felt passionate about him. He was the guy they settled for rather than the one they couldn't resist. When Tom began to differentiate, he stopped trying to be perfect and started expressing his actual personality, which was quirky, intellectually intense, sometimes moody, and deeply passionate about obscure historical subjects. Initially, fewer women were interested in him, but the ones who were interested were really interested. Instead of lukewarm approval, he began experiencing genuine attraction, fascination, and desire. The women who connected with his authentic self weren't settling for him. They were choosing him specifically because of his uniqueness, not despite it. Differentiation in relationships means being willing to be disliked by the wrong people in order to be deeply loved by the right ones. It means understanding that universal appeal is actually universal blandness. It means having the courage to polarize, to be too much for some people and exactly right for others. Stage 4, transcendence, beyond the need for validation. The fourth and final stage transcends the ego's need for external validation altogether. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent to others, but rather developing such a strong relationship with yourself that other people's opinions, while considered, don't determine your self-worth or behavior. In this stage, you love yourself not because you've become perfect, but because you've become real. You've stopped trying to be lovable and discovered that you already are lovable, not because of any particular qualities or achievements, but simply because you exist. This unconditional self-acceptance creates a magnetic field around you that draws others who are also seeking authenticity. Elena's transformation exemplified this final stage. After years of codependent relationships, where she derived her identity from her partner's approval, she went through what she called her hermit phase, a period of intentional solitude where she learned to be her own best companion. She developed hobbies she enjoyed, created a living space that reflected her taste, and built a life that fulfilled her whether or not anyone else was part of it. When Elena eventually returned to dating, everything had changed. She no longer needed a relationship to feel complete, which paradoxically made her incredibly attractive to high-quality partners. She could be genuinely interested in others without being needy. She could offer love without demanding it in return. She could be vulnerable without being desperate. The transcendence of her need for validation had made her magnetically authentic. But transcendence doesn't happen automatically. The ego resists this stage because it threatens the ego's sense of importance, its need to be special, its addiction to drama and validation. The ego prefers the familiarity of suffering to the unknown territory of genuine self-acceptance. This is why many people cycle between the first three stages without ever reaching transcendence. They recognize their persona, integrate some shadow material, differentiate themselves to some degree, but then get pulled back into seeking external validation when insecurity arises. True transcendence requires consistent inner work, ongoing shadow integration, and the cultivation of what Jung called the religious attitude, a sense of connection to something larger than the ego. I want you to honestly assess where you are in these four stages. Are you still primarily operating from persona, trying to be who you think others want you to be? Are you in the integration phase, working to accept rejected parts of yourself? Are you differentiating, finding the courage to be unique even if it's uncomfortable? Or have you touched transcendence, that place of self-acceptance that doesn't depend on external circumstances? Most people never make it past stage 2. They get stuck in shadow work, endlessly processing their issues without ever moving toward authentic expression and transcendence. But those who complete all 4 stages discover that self-love isn't just a nice idea. It's a magnetic force that naturally attracts the kind of deep, authentic love that most people only dream about. The journey through these stages isn't linear. You might transcend in one area of life, while still operating from persona in another. You might integrate certain shadow aspects while still rejecting others. The path is spiraling rather than straight, with each cycle bringing deeper integration and more authentic self-expression. But there's a particular aspect of shadow work that deserves special attention, one that most people resist because it challenges our comfortable self-concepts. We must now dive deeper into the darkness, into the parts of yourself that you're absolutely convinced are unlovable. Because it's precisely these rejected aspects that hold the key to your magnetic authenticity. There's a disturbing truth that most people spend their entire lives running from. The very qualities you hate most about yourself are often the source of your greatest magnetism when integrated consciously. What you've been taught to reject, suppress, and hide away in shame may actually be the key to becoming irresistibly attractive to the right kind of people. Jung observed, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But in the context of love and relationships, this means something even more radical. You cannot attract authentic love while rejecting authentic parts of yourself. Every aspect of your personality that you've disowned and hidden in shadow creates an energetic leak, a sense of incompleteness that others unconsciously detect. The shadow isn't just the repository of your negative traits, it's also the container for your disowned power, your rejected gifts, your hidden magnificence. Some of your greatest assets are buried in shadow because they were too threatening, too powerful, or too authentic for the people around you to accept when you were developing your sense of self. Let me share a story that illustrates just how transformative shadow integration can be. Maria, a client I worked with extensively, had always prided herself on being selfless, giving, and accommodating in relationships. She was the woman who never had needs, never made demands, never caused problems. She was what many would consider the ideal girlfriend, agreeable, supportive, always putting her partner's needs first. But Maria's relationships followed a predictable pattern. Men would initially appreciate her giving nature, then gradually begin to take her for granted, then eventually lose respect for her completely. They would begin treating her as furniture, useful, reliable, but not particularly exciting or valuable. Several partners had even cheated on her, claiming they needed more passion or more challenge in their lives. What Maria didn't realize was that her shadow contained everything she had learned to reject about female nature: assertiveness, demands, boundaries, selfishness, and even a certain amount of what she called bitchiness. She had split off these qualities because her family had taught her that these traits made women unlovable. But in rejecting her shadow, she had also rejected her power, her magnetism, and her capacity to command respect. The breakthrough came when Maria began to consciously integrate what she called her selfish bitch, the part of her that had desires, demands, and boundaries. She started saying no to requests that drained her energy. She began expressing preferences instead of always deferring to others. She started prioritizing her own needs alongside others' needs instead of sacrificing herself completely. The transformation was immediate and startling. Instead of pushing people away, Maria's newfound assertiveness made her magnetic. Men who had previously taken her for granted suddenly became attentive and pursuing. New partners approached her with a level of respect and fascination she had never experienced. By integrating her shadow, she had reclaimed her power and, with it, her attractiveness. This is how shadow work operates in relationships. The qualities you're convinced make you unlovable are often the very qualities that create genuine attraction when expressed consciously rather than suppressed unconsciously. Your shadow contains what Jung called the golden shadow, positive qualities that you disowned because they felt too big, too powerful, or too threatening to others. Perhaps you learned to hide your intelligence because it made others uncomfortable. Perhaps you suppressed your sexuality because it felt dangerous. Perhaps you rejected your ambition because you were taught that it was unattractive in your gender. But here's what most people don't understand. When you reject parts of yourself, you don't actually eliminate them. You just drive them underground where they operate unconsciously, often in destructive ways. The anger you won't own comes out as passive aggression. The sexuality you suppress emerges as inappropriate behavior. The power you disown expresses itself as manipulation or victimhood. Shadow work in relationships means learning to own and express these rejected qualities consciously, rather than letting them leak out unconsciously. It means understanding that every trait exists on a spectrum. Anger can be destructive rage or healthy boundaries. Sexuality can be inappropriate behavior or magnetic life force. Selfishness can be narcissism or healthy self-care. The goal isn't to eliminate these qualities, but to integrate them wisely. When you own your anger consciously, you develop unshakable boundaries. When you integrate your sexuality consciously, you become magnetically attractive. When you embrace your selfishness consciously, you become someone whose attention and affection have real value. David, another client, had spent years suppressing what he called his dark masculine side, his capacity for aggression, dominance, and what he considered caveman instincts. He had been taught that these qualities were toxic, primitive, and unacceptable in modern relationships. So he developed a persona of the sensitive New Age guy, gentle, accommodating, emotionally available, and completely non-threatening. But David's relationships suffered from a predictable pattern. Women would initially appreciate his sensitivity, then gradually lose attraction to him, claiming they felt more like friends than lovers. Despite his emotional intelligence and caring nature, his relationships lacked passion, sexual energy, and the kind of polarity that creates excitement. When David began to integrate his shadow masculine, not the toxic version but the conscious version, everything changed. He learned to be assertive without being aggressive, dominant without being controlling, powerful without being abusive. He discovered that what he had labeled toxic masculinity was actually healthy masculine energy that he had demonized and disowned. The integration of his shadow masculine made David incredibly attractive to women who were seeking not just emotional safety, but also excitement, challenge, and polarity. His relationships became more passionate, more dynamic, and more fulfilling for both partners. By owning his power consciously, he could offer both strength and sensitivity, both challenge and comfort. This points to a crucial understanding. The shadow often contains not toxic qualities, but natural human qualities that you've been taught to fear or reject. Your shadow anger isn't necessarily destructive. It might be your capacity for healthy boundaries. Your shadow selfishness isn't necessarily narcissistic. It might be your instinct for self-preservation and self-care. The process of shadow integration requires what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. You must learn to contain contradictory aspects of yourself without trying to resolve the contradiction. You can be both kind and fierce, both generous and self-protective, both loving and boundaried. The goal isn't to become one-dimensional, but to become multidimensional, to develop the full spectrum of human capacity. But shadow work isn't just about individual transformation. It's also about understanding how shadow projections destroy relationships. When you haven't owned your own shadow, you tend to project it onto others. You see in them the qualities you can't accept in yourself. You're triggered by their behavior because it reflects your own disowned aspects. The person who annoys you most in relationships is often carrying your disowned shadow. The qualities that trigger your judgment, criticism, or contempt are frequently the very qualities you've rejected in yourself. This creates a cycle of attraction and repulsion. You're simultaneously drawn to and repelled by people who embody your shadow because they represent both your wholeness and your self-rejection. I want you to take a moment and honestly examine what triggers you most in relationships. What behaviors or qualities in others create the strongest negative reactions in you? What do you judge most harshly in potential partners? These triggers are often pointing directly toward your own shadow material, the parts of yourself that you need to integrate in order to become whole and, therefore, magnetically attractive. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." In relationships, this means that every judgment you have about others is an opportunity to discover what you've rejected about yourself. Every criticism you make is a chance to explore what shadow aspect you need to integrate. The beautiful paradox of shadow work is that the more you embrace your darkness consciously, the more your light can shine authentically. The more you accept your flaws and limitations, the more genuine your strengths become. The more you integrate your rejected aspects, the more magnetic your presence becomes to people who are also committed to authenticity and growth. But shadow integration is just one part of the journey toward authentic self-love. There's another mask that must be addressed, one so pervasive, so convincing, that most people never realize they're wearing it at all. This is the persona, the social face we present to the world, and it may be the greatest barrier to authentic love that exists. There's a heartbreaking irony at the center of most people's romantic lives. The very strategies they use to attract love are the same strategies that prevent authentic intimacy. Every day, millions of people wake up and put on a mask designed to make them more lovable, more attractive, more acceptable to others. But this mask, what Jung called the persona, becomes the very thing that ensures they will never be truly known or loved for who they actually are. The persona isn't necessarily false. It's often composed of real qualities that you genuinely possess. But it becomes problematic when it's the only face you show to the world, when it's a carefully curated selection of your best traits, designed to win approval while hiding everything you consider less attractive about yourself. In romantic relationships, the persona manifests as the perfect partner version of yourself. You become accommodating when you're naturally strong-willed. You present yourself as low maintenance when you actually have specific needs and desires. You emphasize your agreeable qualities while suppressing anything that might create conflict or discomfort. You perform interest in activities that bore you and hide passions that you fear might seem weird or unappealing. The cruel trap is this: even if your persona succeeds in attracting someone, you end up in a relationship where you're loved for who you're pretending to be, rather than who you actually are. And deep down, you know this. You know they haven't fallen in love with you. They've fallen in love with your performance. This creates a chronic anxiety that haunts the relationship. If they really knew me, would they still love me? Let me tell you about Tom, whose story illustrates the persona trap perfectly. Tom had developed what he thought was the ideal boyfriend persona. He was always available, never moody, perpetually positive, and completely accommodating to his partner's preferences. He prided himself on being easy to be with and drama-free. His dating profile described him as laid-back, adventurous, and always up for anything. The problem was that Tom wasn't actually laid back. He was naturally intense and passionate about his interests. He wasn't always up for anything. He had strong preferences and sometimes needed solitude to recharge. He wasn't perpetually positive. he experienced the full range of human emotions, including frustration, sadness, and occasional irritability. Tom's persona was successful in the sense that it attracted women who appreciated his seemingly easygoing nature. But these relationships inevitably followed the same pattern: initial attraction based on his agreeable persona, followed by a gradual sense that something was missing, that there was no edge to him, nothing challenging or mysterious or deeply engaging. Women would describe him as nice, but admit they didn't feel passionate about him. They liked him, but they weren't fascinated by him. The breakthrough came when Tom began to let his persona drop gradually. He started expressing his actual interests, even when they were obscure or intense. He began showing his natural intensity about subjects he cared about. He allowed himself to have preferences, moods, and boundaries. He stopped being infinitely accommodating and started being genuinely himself. Initially, this felt terrifying. Some women were indeed less interested in the real Tom than they had been in his persona. But something remarkable began to happen. The women who were interested in his authentic self were much more interested. Instead of lukewarm appreciation, he began experiencing genuine fascination, attraction, and desire from partners who were drawn specifically to his unique combination of qualities. The persona develops as a childhood survival strategy. You learned early that certain aspects of your personality were welcomed while others were rejected, criticized, or punished. So you naturally began to emphasize the welcomed traits and suppress the rejected ones. Over time, this adaptation becomes so automatic that you forget you're doing it. The persona becomes your default mode of relating to others, especially in romantic contexts where the stakes feel highest. But here's what most people don't realize. The persona is exhausting to maintain. It requires constant vigilance, constant performance, constant fear of slipping up and revealing your true thoughts, feelings, or desires. You become like an actor who never gets to leave the stage, always performing a role rather than simply being yourself. More importantly, the persona creates shallow relationships. When you're always performing, others can never truly know you. They fall in love with your highlight reel rather than your full human complexity. And you can never fully relax because you're always managing your image, always trying to maintain the illusion of being the person you think they want you to be. The persona trap is particularly insidious in the age of social media and online dating, where the pressure to present a curated, optimized version of yourself has reached unprecedented levels. Your dating profile becomes the ultimate persona, a carefully selected collection of your most attractive photos, your wittiest observations, your most impressive accomplishments, all designed to market yourself as the ideal partner. But authentic attraction doesn't work through marketing. It works through recognition. When two authentic people meet, there's a sense of, I see you and you see me. There's fascination with each other's uniqueness, appreciation for qualities that can't be performed or faked, and the kind of deep resonance that only occurs between two people who aren't hiding behind masks. The vulnerability required to drop the persona feels enormous because it means risking rejection for who you actually are rather than who you're pretending to be. It means accepting that some people won't like your authentic self, but also opening the possibility that others will love you specifically because of your authenticity, not despite it. Sarah, whom we've met before, had perfected the cool girl persona, never needy, always understanding, completely low maintenance. She prided herself on being different from other girls, more rational, less emotional, easier to be with. But beneath this mask, she was dying of loneliness. The cool girl persona had become a prison that prevented anyone from ever seeing her vulnerability, her depth, her actual needs and desires. When Sarah began to drop this persona, She started expressing her real feelings instead of always being understanding. She began asking for what she needed instead of pretending she needed nothing. She allowed herself to be occasionally difficult, emotional, or demanding. The transformation was remarkable. Instead of pushing people away, her authenticity drew in partners who were capable of real intimacy and who were attracted to her depth rather than her easygoing facade. The persona isn't inherently evil. It serves important social functions and can be useful in certain contexts. The problem arises when it becomes your only mode of relating, when you lose touch with who you are beneath the mask. The goal isn't to eliminate the persona entirely, but to develop what Jung called persona flexibility, the ability to consciously choose when to wear the mask and when to let it drop. In intimate relationships, persona flexibility means being able to be appropriate in social contexts, while being authentic in private moments. It means presenting your best self when the situation calls for it, while also being capable of vulnerability, rawness, and emotional honesty when intimacy requires it. But dropping the persona requires more than just deciding to be authentic. It requires developing a strong enough relationship with yourself that you can tolerate others' reactions to your authenticity. It requires what I call rejection resilience, the ability to be disliked by some people without losing your sense of self-worth. This is where the previous stages of self-love become crucial. If you haven't done shadow work, if you haven't integrated your rejected aspects, then dropping the persona feels too dangerous because you're not sure you can love what's underneath it. But when you've learned to accept and integrate your full humanity, including your shadows, your flaws, your contradictions, then letting others see your authentic self becomes possible. The most magnetic people are those who have transcended the need to be universally liked. They understand that polarization is more attractive than bland universal appeal. They would rather be deeply loved by a few people who resonate with their authenticity than be mildly appreciated by many people who only know their persona. I want you to take an honest inventory of your own persona patterns. In what ways do you modify yourself to be more attractive to others? What aspects of your personality do you consistently hide or downplay in romantic contexts? What would you be afraid to let a partner see about you? These hidden aspects aren't problems to be solved. They're parts of yourself that need to be integrated and expressed for authentic love to be possible. The journey from persona to authenticity isn't just about individual transformation. It literally changes how others perceive and respond to you. When you drop the mask and begin relating from your authentic self, you create what I call the mirror effect, a phenomenon so powerful that it can transform not just your relationships, but your entire experience of being alive. What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally alter how you understand attraction, influence, and the mysterious dynamics that determine who is drawn to you and who isn't. There's an invisible force field around every human being, an energetic signature that broadcasts your relationship with yourself to everyone you encounter. This field is so powerful that it determines the quality of every interaction you have, often before a single word is spoken. Jung understood this principle when he wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But the mirror effect goes deeper than just recognizing projections. It operates on the fundamental principle that your external relationships are always reflecting your internal relationship with yourself. The way you treat yourself becomes the template for how others treat you, often in ways so subtle that it seems like magic. This isn't positive thinking or mystical theory. It's observable psychology. Your self-relationship determines your posture, your eye contact, your tone of voice, the boundaries you set, the behavior you accept from others, and thousands of micro-expressions that communicate your self-worth to the unconscious minds of everyone around you. people respond to these unconscious signals faster and more powerfully than they respond to your conscious words or actions. When you truly love yourself, not as a practice or affirmation, but as a lived reality, everything about your presence changes. Your body language shifts from defensive or approval-seeking to naturally confident and relaxed. Your voice carries a quality of self-assurance that doesn't need to prove anything. Your boundaries become clear and non-negotiable without being aggressive or defensive. You occupy space differently, as if you have a right to be here, as if your existence is inherently valuable. Let me share the story of Elena, whose transformation illustrates the mirror effect so clearly it almost seems supernatural. Elena had spent years in relationships where she felt invisible, taken for granted, and ultimately discarded. Partners would initially show interest, then gradually begin treating her with less and less respect. They would cancel dates at the last minute, forget important occasions, and eventually cheat or leave without much explanation. Elena was convinced that she was simply unlucky in love, that she attracted the wrong type of people, that all the good ones were taken. But when we examined her patterns more closely, a different picture emerged. Elena's relationship with herself was characterized by self-criticism, self-neglect, and a fundamental belief that she wasn't worthy of love or respect. She routinely canceled her own plans to accommodate others, forgot to take care of her own needs, and betrayed herself by accepting treatment that she knew was unacceptable. The mirror effect was perfect. Elena was attracting people who treated her exactly the way she treated herself. Her external relationships were reflecting her internal relationship with surgical precision. She was projecting an energetic signal that said, "I don't value myself very highly," and others were unconsciously responding to that signal by treating her accordingly. The transformation began when Elena started treating herself the way she wanted to be treated by others. She began keeping promises to herself, prioritizing her own well-being, setting and maintaining boundaries, and refusing to accept behavior from others that she wouldn't tolerate from herself. The changes in her dating life were immediate and dramatic. People who had previously taken her for granted suddenly became more attentive and respectful. New potential partners approached her with a level of consideration and seriousness that she had never experienced. Even her friendships shifted. People who had routinely canceled plans or taken her for granted began treating her time and attention as valuable resources. But the most remarkable change was in the quality of people she attracted. Instead of partners who were looking for someone to take advantage of, she began attracting people who were also committed to self-respect and mutual consideration. The mirror effect had shifted from reflecting self-neglect to reflecting self-love, and her external relationships transformed accordingly. This is how the mirror effect operates. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. More specifically, you attract people who are operating at your level of self-awareness, self-respect, and emotional maturity. If you're unconscious, you'll attract unconscious people. If you're needy, you'll attract people who exploit neediness or who are equally needy themselves. If you're whole, you'll attract others who are also on the path to wholeness. Your self-relationship creates what I call your energetic signature, a complex combination of subtle cues that communicate your internal state to others. This includes your posture. Do you take up space confidently or try to make yourself small? Your eye contact. Do you meet others' gaze directly or look away? Your voice tone. Does it carry conviction or seek approval? And your boundaries. Are they clear and consistent or flexible and unclear? But the energetic signature goes deeper than just body language. It includes your willingness to be authentic rather than performing for approval. It includes your capacity to be alone without desperation, which creates a sense of mystery and independence. It includes your ability to say no without guilt, which makes your yes meaningful. It includes your comfort with your own sexuality, which creates magnetic attraction. Most people have no idea they're broadcasting their self-relationship so clearly. They think they can fake confidence, perform self-love, or pretend to have boundaries. But the unconscious mind of others reads the truth beneath the performance. You can't fake the relaxed presence that comes from genuine self-acceptance. You can't perform the magnetic quality that comes from not needing external validation. Marcus discovered this when he stopped trying to be attractive and started focusing on becoming authentic. For years, he had approached dating like a marketing campaign, trying to present the most impressive version of himself, highlighting his achievements and carefully managing his image. But despite his efforts, he consistently attracted partners who seemed more interested in what he could provide than who he actually was. The shift came when Marcus decided to prioritize his own well-being over external approval. He started pursuing hobbies that genuinely interested him rather than ones that might impress others. He began expressing his real opinions instead of saying what he thought others wanted to hear. He started taking time for solitude and self-reflection instead of constantly seeking social validation. The results were counterintuitive. By caring less about being attractive to others, Marcus became more attractive. His authenticity created a magnetic quality that drew people who were genuinely interested in him as a person. His comfort with solitude made others curious about what made him so self-contained. His willingness to be different made him memorable and intriguing. This illustrates another aspect of the mirror effect. When you stop needing others to validate your worth, you become more valuable to them. When you stop chasing approval, others begin seeking yours. When you become genuinely content with your own company, others want to join that contentment. But the mirror effect isn't just about attracting better treatment from others. It's also about how your self-perception changes your interpretation of others' behavior. When you love yourself authentically, you naturally assume positive intent from others instead of looking for signs of rejection or criticism. You interpret ambiguous situations in your favor because that's how you treat yourself internally. This creates what psychologists call a positive feedback loop. Your self-love creates better treatment from others, which reinforces your self-love, which creates even better treatment, and so on. The opposite is also true. Self-rejection creates poor treatment from others, which reinforces self-rejection, creating a negative spiral that can last for years or even decades. Sarah experienced this positive feedback loop when she began treating herself with the respect she had always wanted from partners. She started speaking to herself with kindness instead of criticism. She began prioritizing her own needs alongside others' needs. She set boundaries around her time and energy. The mirror effect was immediate. People began treating her with the same respect she was showing herself. But perhaps the most profound aspect of the mirror effect is how it changes your relationship with rejection. When you truly love yourself, rejection from others stops feeling like evidence of your unworthiness and starts feeling like incompatibility, which is actually useful information. You begin to see rejection as the universe's way of steering you toward people who can appreciate your authentic self. This shift in perspective is revolutionary. Instead of trying to make yourself acceptable to everyone, you begin to trust that the right people will be attracted to your authenticity, while the wrong people will naturally select themselves out. Rejection becomes a filter that saves you time and energy, rather than a judgment that devastates your self-worth. The mirror effect explains why fake it till you make it strategies ultimately fail in relationships. You can't fake the energetic signature of genuine self-love. The unconscious minds of others will detect the performance and respond accordingly. Only when the self-love becomes authentic, when you actually like yourself, enjoy your own company, and treat yourself with respect, does the mirror effect begin to reflect that reality back to you through others? I want you to take an honest look at your current relationships, romantic, platonic, professional, and familial. How are others treating you? Are they respectful of your time and boundaries? Do they seem genuinely interested in your thoughts and feelings? Do they prioritize your well-being alongside their own? The pattern you see is likely a precise mirror of how you treat yourself. If you're not happy with what you see in the mirror, the solution isn't to try to change others. It's to change your relationship with yourself. As you begin to treat yourself with greater love, respect, and consideration, you'll be amazed at how quickly the mirror shifts to reflect this new internal reality. But self-love isn't just a personal transformation. It's part of a larger journey towards psychological wholeness that Jung called individuation. This journey doesn't just change your relationships, it changes your entire relationship with existence itself. And it's this journey toward wholeness that holds the key to becoming the kind of person who doesn't chase love, because love gravitates naturally toward them. There comes a moment in every person's psychological development when they face a profound choice: continue living as a collection of other people's expectations, societal roles, and unconscious patterns, or embark on the hero's journey toward becoming who they actually are. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological and spiritual work of becoming whole, complete, and authentic within yourself. And it's this journey, more than any technique or strategy, that creates the magnetic authenticity that naturally attracts deep, meaningful love. Individuation isn't self-improvement in the conventional sense. It's not about becoming a better version of who you think you should be. It's about uncovering and expressing who you actually are beneath all the layers of conditioning, expectation, and adaptive strategies you developed to survive and belong. It's about becoming so fundamentally complete within yourself that you no longer need another person to fill any void or provide any missing piece of your identity. The individuation journey follows the classic pattern of the hero's journey: departure from the familiar, initiation through trials and challenges, and return with wisdom and wholeness. But in psychological terms, this means departing from unconscious living, facing the shadow aspects of yourself you've been avoiding, integrating your disowned qualities, and returning to life with a sense of authentic selfhood that radiates magnetic presence. Let me share Elena's story, a transformation so profound that it illustrates every stage of the individuation process and its impact on attracting authentic love. Elena came to me at 32, describing herself as completely lost in relationships. She had spent her entire adult life defining herself through her partnerships, becoming whoever her current boyfriend seemed to want her to be. She was a successful marketing executive, but she felt like she was marketing herself in relationships too, constantly adapting, performing, trying to be the perfect girlfriend. She had no clear sense of her own preferences, desires, or even personality outside of romantic contexts. The departure phase of Elena's individuation began with what she called the breakdown. Her most serious relationship ended when her partner told her he felt like he was dating a mirror rather than a person. "I don't know who you are," he said. "You become whoever you think I want you to be, but I want to be with someone, not a reflection of myself." The brutal honesty of this feedback shattered Elena's carefully constructed persona and forced her to confront a terrifying question. If she wasn't who others wanted her to be, then who was she? This is how individuation often begins, with a crisis that makes unconscious living impossible. The old strategies stop working, the familiar roles feel empty, and you're forced to confront the possibility that you've been living someone else's life rather than your own. It's terrifying because it means leaving the safety of external validation and venturing into the unknown territory of self-definition. Elena's initiation phase involved what she described as learning to be alone with myself without dying of boredom or anxiety. For the first time in her adult life, she deliberately stayed single and began exploring who she was when no one was watching, when there was no one to perform for or adapt to. This process was initially excruciating. She discovered that beneath her adaptable persona was a deep well of emptiness, confusion, and self-doubt. But gradually, through the practice of solitude, Elena began to discover her authentic preferences. She realized she actually loved hiking alone in nature, something she had never admitted because previous boyfriends found it antisocial. She discovered a passion for pottery, which felt too messy and impractical to pursue, while she was focused on being the perfect girlfriend. She found that she had strong political opinions that she had always suppressed to avoid conflict. More importantly, Elena began to encounter and integrate her shadow qualities. She discovered that beneath her people-pleasing facade was a fierce, independent woman who had opinions, boundaries, and a capacity for healthy anger when those boundaries were violated. She learned to love parts of herself that she had always considered too much: her intensity, her occasional moodiness, her need for solitude, her high standards. The integration of these shadow qualities transformed Elena's entire presence. Instead of the adaptive chameleon she had been, she became a woman with substance, depth, and mystery. She developed what Jung called a standpoint of her own, a clear sense of her values, preferences, and non-negotiables that didn't shift based on who she was with or what they seemed to want from her. But the most profound transformation was Elena's relationship with solitude. Instead of experiencing aloneness as loneliness, as evidence of her failure to attract or keep a partner, she began to experience it as sacred space for self-communion and growth. She created a living environment that reflected her authentic taste rather than generic design magazine aesthetics. She developed routines and rituals that nourished her soul rather than her image. She became, in the truest sense, her own best companion. This shift from loneliness to sacred solitude is perhaps the most crucial aspect of individuation for attracting authentic love. When you genuinely enjoy your own company, when you've created a life that fulfills you, whether or not anyone else is part of it, you radiate a quality of completeness that is magnetically attractive to others. You become someone who chooses relationships from desire rather than need, from abundance rather than scarcity. The return phase of Elena's individuation began when she re-entered the dating world after 2 years of intensive self-development. But everything had changed. Instead of scanning potential partners for signs of what they might want from her so she could become that person, she found herself genuinely curious about who they were and whether they would complement the life she had already built for herself. The quality of people she attracted was completely different. Instead of partners who were looking for someone to complete them or fulfill unmet needs, Elena began connecting with people who were also on their own individuation journeys. These were partners who had their own sense of purpose, their own relationship with solitude, their own capacity for self-reflection and growth. Her first serious relationship after individuation was with James, a writer who had also gone through his own process of becoming whole alone. Their connection was based not on neediness or projection, but on genuine appreciation for each other's individuality. They could be together without losing themselves, support each other's growth without trying to change each other, and maintain their own interests and friendships without feeling threatened by independence. What Elena discovered illustrates the central paradox of individuation. Only when you no longer need a relationship to feel complete can you create truly fulfilling relationships. Only when you've learned to love your own company can you offer genuine companionship to others. Only when you've integrated your own masculine and feminine sides can you appreciate rather than project onto a partner's opposite gender qualities. Individuation doesn't mean becoming selfish or isolated. It means becoming authentically generous. When you're not desperately trying to get your own needs met through others, you can actually see and respond to their real needs. When you're not performing for approval, you can offer genuine appreciation. When you're not seeking validation, you can provide authentic support. The individuated person becomes magnetic not through effort or strategy, but through the simple fact of being completely themselves. They carry a quality of presence that is both self-contained and generous, both independent and relational. They're comfortable with their own complexity, their contradictions, their shadows, and light. This wholeness creates what Jung called numinous presence, a quality that draws others like moths to flame. But individuation isn't a destination you arrive at. It's an ongoing process of becoming more conscious, more authentic, more whole. Even after significant transformation, new layers of unconsciousness reveal themselves. New shadow material emerges to be integrated. New aspects of authenticity ask to be expressed. The journey continues throughout life, with each cycle bringing deeper integration and more magnetic presence. David's story illustrates how individuation continues to evolve even after initial transformation. After integrating his shadow masculine and learning to be authentically powerful, rather than either aggressive or passive, David entered what he called the second individuation, a deeper layer of psychological work that involved integrating his creative, spiritual, and emotional depths. This second phase of individuation made David even more attractive to partners who were seeking not just strength and presence, but also depth, creativity, and emotional intelligence. His relationships became collaborations in consciousness, partnerships where both people supported each other's continued individuation rather than trying to halt growth in favor of security. The individuation journey challenges one of the deepest myths of romantic culture, that love is about finding your other half. Jung's psychology reveals that this is backwards. Love is about two whole people choosing to create something together that neither could create alone. It's about appreciation rather than completion, recognition rather than projection, collaboration rather than codependence. When you've done the work of individuation, when you've integrated your shadow, dropped your persona, developed a relationship with your internal lover, and learned to be whole alone, you become capable of what Jung called conscious relationship. This isn't the unconscious merger that most people call love, where two incomplete people try to become one complete unit. It's the conscious choice of two individuated people to share their wholeness. I want you to honestly assess where you are in your own individuation journey. Have you begun to separate from the collective expectations about who you should be? Are you developing your own values, preferences, and vision for your life? Have you started to integrate shadow qualities that you previously rejected? Are you learning to enjoy solitude rather than merely tolerating it? Are you becoming someone you genuinely like spending time with? If you recognize yourself as being early in this journey, don't despair. Every step toward greater self-awareness and authenticity makes you more attractive to others who are also committed to consciousness and growth. You don't have to be perfectly individuated to attract love. You just have to be genuinely committed to the journey of becoming who you really are. But there's a particular challenge that almost everyone faces on the individuation journey, a phase so difficult that many people turn back rather than continuing forward. It's the phase Jung called the dark night of the soul, and it's often the final test before breakthrough to authentic self-love. Understanding this phase can help you navigate it successfully rather than getting stuck in the darkness. There's a profound secret that most people discover too late in life. The quality of your relationship with yourself when you're alone determines the quality of every relationship you'll ever have with others. Your solitude is not empty space to be filled with distraction or companionship. It's sacred ground where you meet yourself, integrate your wholeness, and develop the magnetic authenticity that naturally attracts conscious love. But our culture has taught you to fear solitude, to interpret aloneness as loneliness, to believe that being by yourself means being rejected, abandoned, or unloved. You've been conditioned to see solitude as a problem to be solved rather than a sanctuary to be cultivated. This fundamental misunderstanding creates the very desperation that repels authentic connection and attracts unconscious, codependent relationships. The difference between loneliness and sacred solitude is not circumstantial, it's psychological. Loneliness is what you experience when you're running from yourself, when your own company feels unbearable, when you need others to distract you from the discomfort of your internal reality. Sacred solitude is what you experience when you've learned to be your own best companion, when your inner world is rich enough to sustain you, when you choose relationships from desire rather than desperation. Most people have never experienced true sacred solitude because they've never learned to stop running from themselves. Every moment of potential aloneness gets filled with social media, Netflix, phone calls, dating apps, or other forms of stimulation designed to avoid the confrontation with who they actually are when no one else is defining them. But this avoidance ensures that they remain strangers to themselves, and strangers to themselves inevitably become strangers in their relationships. Let me share Marcus's transformation, a story that illustrates how mastering sacred solitude becomes the foundation for attracting the deepest kind of love. Marcus came to me describing what he called chronic relationship addiction. He had never been single for more than a few weeks since high school. The moment one relationship ended, he would immediately begin pursuing the next one, often overlapping connections to avoid any gap of aloneness. He claimed he was just a people person who loved being in love, but beneath this story was a terror of facing himself without the mirror of another person's attention. When Marcus's most recent relationship ended, a 3-year partnership that had become increasingly codependent, I suggested something radical, a year of intentional celibacy and solitude. Not isolation or withdrawal from friends and family, but a commitment to not dating, not pursuing romantic connections, and not using sex or romance as a way to avoid self-confrontation. Marcus initially resisted this idea with every fiber of his being, which told me it was exactly what he needed. The first months of Marcus's solitude were excruciating. Without the constant stimulation of romantic pursuit and relationship drama, he encountered parts of himself he had been avoiding for years. He discovered that beneath his charming, socially adept persona was a well of sadness about his childhood, anger about opportunities he had sacrificed for others' approval, and a deep uncertainty about who he was when he wasn't performing for someone else's affection. But something remarkable began to happen as Marcus learned to sit with these uncomfortable feelings rather than medicating them with romantic distractions. He started to develop what I call emotional self-sufficiency, the capacity to comfort himself when sad, motivate himself when discouraged, celebrate his own victories, and provide his own emotional regulation rather than depending on others to manage his internal state. Marcus began creating what he called a life I actually want to live, not a life designed to impress potential partners, but one that genuinely reflected his interests, values, and vision. He started taking photography classes because he had always been interested in visual art, not because it might make him more attractive to creative types. He began traveling alone to places that fascinated him rather than only going where partners wanted to go. He developed a meditation practice, started cooking elaborate meals for himself, and created a living space that felt like a sanctuary rather than a showroom. Most importantly, Marcus learned to distinguish between productive solitude and reactive isolation. Productive solitude felt generative, creative, and nourishing. Time spent reading, walking in nature, pursuing hobbies, reflecting on his life and growth. Reactive isolation felt depleted, defensive, and bitter. Time spent avoiding others out of hurt, resentment, or fear of rejection. He learned to cultivate the former while recognizing and healing the latter. After 8 months of this practice, something shifted in Marcus's entire presence. Friends began commenting that he seemed different, more centered, more confident, more genuinely content. But the most significant change was in how others responded to him romantically. Without trying to attract anyone, without dating apps or active pursuit, Marcus began receiving attention from high-quality people who were drawn to his newfound self-possession and authentic contentment. When Marcus eventually returned to dating after his year of solitude, everything had changed. Instead of the desperate, needy energy that had characterized his previous relationships, he approached dating with curiosity and discernment. He was genuinely interested in learning about potential partners rather than frantically trying to make himself attractive to them. He could enjoy connections without immediately needing them to become serious relationships. The quality of people he attracted was completely different. Instead of partners who were also running from themselves through relationship addiction, Marcus began connecting with people who had also done their own work on sacred solitude. These were partners who brought their own sense of completeness to the relationship rather than looking for him to fill their voids. His first serious relationship after the year of solitude was with Anna, a therapist who had also done intensive work on becoming whole alone. Their connection was characterized by what Jung called loving participation in each other's individuation. They could be deeply intimate without losing their individual identities, supportive without being codependent, committed without being possessive. What Marcus discovered illustrates the central principle of sacred solitude. When you genuinely enjoy your own company, others want to join that enjoyment. When you've created a life that fulfills you independently, others are drawn to participate in that fulfillment. When you're not desperately seeking someone to complete you, you become attractive to people who are also complete within themselves. Sacred solitude develops what I call magnetic self-sufficiency, the quality of being so comfortable with yourself that others feel comfortable around you. When you're not anxiously seeking validation, attention, or approval, others naturally want to give you these things. When you're not trying to be interesting, your authentic interests become fascinating to those who resonate with them. But sacred solitude isn't just about attracting others. It's about developing the internal resources that make deep intimacy possible. When you know yourself thoroughly, when you've sat with your own shadows and light, when you've learned to love your own complexity, you become capable of truly seeing and loving another person's complexity rather than projecting your own unmet needs onto them. The practice of sacred solitude involves several key elements that distinguish it from mere aloneness. Presence over distraction. Instead of filling alone time with mindless stimulation, you learn to be present with whatever arises. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, creative impulses. You develop the capacity to be with yourself without entertainment or distraction. Self-companionship. Over self-abandonment. You begin treating yourself the way you would treat a beloved friend, with kindness, interest, and genuine care. You become someone you actually enjoy spending time with, rather than someone you're trying to escape from or improve.